maps, the secret votes, and the night Karen broke onto his property. The fall was swift and brutal, because the only thing worse than an enemy with power is an enemy with proof. But let's start from the beginning. The morning began with a jarring symphony of metal grinding against metal and the sharp bark of orders from workers. John Parker shot upright from his chair, his peaceful coffee moment shattered. His heart quickened as he rushed outside, slippers scuffing against the cracked stone pathway his father laid years ago. And there stood the violation. A towering steel gate was being erected across his own driveway. Thick metal bars glinted coldly under the morning sun, and sparks from welding machines hissed into the air. The smell of burning steel mixed with the earthy scent of dew-soaked grass. His driveway, the path he had driven down for years where his daughter played hopscotch on summer evenings, was being stolen before his eyes. John's voice thundered over the chaos, raw with disbelief and anger. "What the hell is this?" His fists clenched as he stormed towards the workers. Then came the voice, the one voice he dreaded most, smooth, sharp, and dripping with false pleasantries. "Good morning, John." Turning, he faced her. Karen Walsh, HOA president and self-appointed queen of the neighborhood. Her blonde bob framed a face carved with condescension, her lips curled in a smirk that screamed entitlement. She clutched a clipboard like a judge's gavel, tapping her manicured nails against it rhythmically, as if already declaring victory. "This," she announced, with theatrical cheer, "is for community safety." Her eyes sparkled with the thrill of power. "According to the updated HOA boundary map, your driveway is now classified as a shared access point. So," she added with syrupy finality, "we're installing this gate. Now, John, I'll need a copy of your key." The world seemed to tilt. His heartbeat pounded in his ears. "What?" His voice, tight with disbelief, cracked through the air. "This is my property." With shaking hands, he stormed back into the house, his heart racing. Moments later, he was back, gripping his original property deed, its pages worn but authoritative. "See this?" He held it up, his voice rising. "This land, my driveway, belongs to me." But Karen didn't flinch. Her smirk deepened, her eyes glinting with a cruel satisfaction. "Oh, John," she sighed, her tone dripping with mock pity. "The HOA has adjusted the boundaries, for the greater good, of course." Her voice wrapped around those last words like a serpent tightening its coils. His stomach knotted with fury and disbelief. Adjusted? Without notice? Without a vote? Without so much as a warning? He felt his breath quicken. His fists ached from clenching so tightly. But Karen had already turned away, barking orders to the workers as if he were nothing more than a leaf in the wind. That evening, his mailbox held the next insult, a $5,000 fine from the HOA. Non-compliance with community safety regulations. His blood boiled. Non-compliance? On my land? His hands trembled with rage as he marched to the newly placed gate. "Fine," he muttered through gritted teeth. "You want a gate? You'll get a gate." He tore off their lock and replaced it with his own, the metal clink ringing like a battle horn. But as twilight fell, a new enemy arrived, thin, crisp, and taped cruelly to his front door. Its cold, printed words hit harder than a fist. "Cease and desist. Unauthorized modification of HOA property." A lump of cold fury formed in his chest. His land, his rights. And now, they claimed he was the trespasser. And to you, the viewer, let me ask, can you imagine this madness? Your home, your sanctuary, ripped from under you, and they have the audacity to call you the problem. Well, let me tell you this. John wasn't backing down. Because now? The fight had just begun. The morning light barely crept through John Parker's kitchen window, casting long shadows across the table where he sat. Eyes heavy, heart heavier. The coffee in his mug had long gone cold, forgotten as he clutched his phone to his ear. On the other end was his attorney, Lisa Monroe, her voice sharp, steady, and full of urgency. "John," she said firmly, "this is how they work. They're betting on you to fold under pressure. You can't. Gather everything, deeds, emails, letters, recordings. If they come at you, we hit back harder." He swallowed the lump in his throat. "I won't let them take my home, Lisa. I swear." But if he thought the first punch had landed, Karen was about to unleash a whole barrage. The next day brought another envelope. Another fine. His fingers ripped it open. $500 for overgrown grass. He glanced out the window. His lawn was trimmed to perfection. The grass barely reached his ankles. "You've got to be kidding me," he muttered. Then another letter. Unauthorized mailbox color. His mailbox, a simple black standard issue, was apparently non-compliant. And the third hit? $750 for improper parking, because his car sat 1 foot too close to his own garage. It was laughable. No, it was war. But the worst blow came not from a letter, but from his neighbors. The warmth he once felt from the people on his street turned ice cold. Conversations stopped when he passed. Eyes darted away. At the HOA meeting, Karen made sure to poison the well completely. Her voice, dripping with false concern, echoed through the room. "John Parker," she declared, "has made it clear he has no regard for community safety. He's choosing to endanger us all by refusing simple security measures. It's reckless. It's selfish." John felt every pair of eyes on him, some in confusion, some in judgment. His fists clenched under the table. Endangering them? For protecting his own damn property? But as the meeting broke, while most turned their backs, 2 people stepped forward. "John!" a rough voice called. He turned to see Paul and Linda, a retired couple from 2 doors down. Paul's eyes were hard with frustration, his wife's filled with worry. "We need to talk," Paul muttered, glancing around. "Karen's been pulling these stunts for years, but this time it's worse." John's pulse quickened. "What do you mean?" Paul's jaw tightened. "We saw her," he said, voice low but sharp. "Karen, on your property, with a locksmith." John's eyes went wide. "A locksmith?" Linda's voice trembled. She tried to change the locks you put on the gate. She didn't see us watching from the porch." The world around him seemed to tilt. His chest burned with fury. "Breaking onto my property? Changing my locks?" His voice was tight with anger. "Thank you. You did the right thing telling me." But inside, the rage boiled hotter. "That's it, Karen." That night, John worked by flashlight, his hands swift and determined. He installed security cameras, front yard, backyard, and by the gate. His heart pounded, every turn of the screwdriver a vow. "Try it again. I dare you." And 2 days later, she did. The alert buzzed on his phone. Motion detected. His thumb flew to the live feed, and there she was. Karen, back again, flashlight in hand, and beside her, a locksmith, tools glinting under the moonlight. John's hands shook as he hit record. His voice was ice as he dialed. 911. I've got a trespasser. She's breaking into my property right now. The dispatcher's voice was calm, but his pulse wasn't. Officers are on the way. Stay inside and keep safe. The minutes stretched like hours, but then red and blue lights flashed down his street. The police cruiser pulled up and 2 officers stepped out, their flashlights slicing through the darkness. "Ma'am," the lead officer called, his voice firm, You're on private property. Step away from the gate. Karen turned, and with her signature smugness, brandished a folded document, the same fake HOA map. "This," she said, her voice dripping with confidence, "is community property. I'm well within my rights." John stepped forward, his phone raised high. "Oh, really?" he said, his voice like a whip crack. "Because I've got something you don't. Proof." With a tap, the security footage played, the grainy but unmistakable image of Karen, trespassing, breaking, and entering. The officer's eyes darkened. "That's enough." He turned to her, his voice cold and final. "Ma'am, that's criminal trespass." And for the first time since this nightmare began, Karen's smirk vanished. The courtroom buzzed with tension, the air thick with whispers and the faint scrape of pens from the reporters lining the benches. Sunlight streamed through the tall windows, casting harsh lines across the polished oak floors. Every seat was filled. Neighbors, community members, and curious onlookers eager to witness the downfall of the HOA's queen. At the plaintiff's table, John Parker sat stiff, his fists clenched on the table, his knuckles white. His heart pounded, but his face was set, calm but burning inside. Beside him, sharp-eyed and steady, was his attorney, Lisa Monroe, her presence like a drawn blade, cold, precise, and ready to cut through every lie. Across the aisle, Karen Walsh. She sat with her usual smug air, her chin high and her lips curled in a faint, patronizing smirk. She wore confidence like armor, her eyes flicking toward John with thinly veiled contempt. To her, this wasn't a trial. It was a formality, a game she thought she'd already won. But she was about to lose everything. The judge, an older woman with a stern face and piercing eyes, cleared her throat. "Let's proceed. Ms. Monroe, you may begin your cross-examination." Lisa stood, her heels clicking sharply against the floor. Her voice was smooth but laced with steel. "Mrs. Walsh," she began, her eyes locking on Karen's, "let's talk about your boundary adjustments." She let the words hang, heavy and sharp. "As president of the HOA, did you hold a community vote before changing the boundary lines, as required by your bylaws?" Karen's smirk faltered for just a second. She shifted in her seat. "Well, not exactly." Lisa raised an eyebrow. "Not exactly. So, to clarify, there was no vote." Her voice, sharp as a whip, filled the room. She turned to the jury. "The rules Karen enforces so harshly on everyone else suddenly don't apply to her." Karen's voice grew tight. "I was acting in the best interest of the community." Lisa didn't blink. Without a vote, without homeowner consent. She paused, then her voice dropped, cold and cutting, and without truth. She moved to the evidence table and picked up a printed email chain. "Let's shed some light on your best interest, shall we?" Lisa's heels clicked as she approached the judge, holding up the document. "This," she announced, her voice ringing with authority, "is an email from Mrs. Walsh to the surveyor." She cleared her throat and read aloud. "Adjust the boundary lines to include Parker's driveway. Just handle it. I'll deal with the fallout later." A wave of gasps swept through the courtroom. The tension snapped tight. Karen's face flushed red. Her eyes darted to her attorney, then back to Lisa. This is taken out of context," she snapped, her voice cracking. "I was protecting the community. That driveway should be ours. He was just being difficult." Lisa didn't flinch. Difficult? For defending his legal property? She stepped back toward the jury. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is what Karen Walsh thinks of your rights. Rules are weapons, and homeowners are obstacles. She didn't just cross the line, she erased it." Before Karen could interject, "Your Honor," Lisa said smoothly, The plaintiff calls Mr. Paul Reynolds to the stand. The room stilled as Paul, his back slightly bent with age but his voice steady, took his oath and sat. His eyes, sharp despite his years, met Karen's. "I've lived in this community for 22 years," he began, his voice worn but firm. "And I've seen Mrs. Walsh's games before. But this time, I witnessed it myself." The jury leaned in. "That night," Paul continued, "my wife and I saw Karen on John's property. She had a locksmith with her. She was trying to break the locks he put on the gate." Karen's eyes flashed wide. "That's a lie," she burst out, her voice shrill. "He's senile. He—" Lisa raised a hand, silencing the chaos. "Your Honor," she said calmly, "I'd like to submit further evidence. The security footage." The bailiff rolled the video. The room hushed to an almost painful silence. On the screen, in stark black and white, there was Karen, her face unmistakable, her flashlight sweeping across the gate as the locksmith knelt beside her, tools clinking softly in the night. The room erupted in whispers. The judge's gavel came down. "Order!" Karen's mask shattered, her composure, her power, gone. She lurched forward, her voice shrill with panic. "This is what's wrong with entitled homeowners," she shrieked. "You people," she spat, her voice rising to hysteria, "don't understand community order. You need people like me to keep you." "Enough." The judge's voice, cold and heavy, slammed through the chaos like a hammer. Karen's rant died in her throat. The room was silent. The judge's eyes, hard as stone, locked onto her. "Mrs. Walsh," she said, her voice